Boom. What up, fam? Anthony Dream Johnson here today, co-founder of the Redman Group, CEO of 21 Studios, founder of the 21 Convention and the 22 Convention, and 21 University. Download it now, 21 University on the App Store on your iPhone or Android device, also on iPad. Now, without further ado, today is episode 125 of the Redman Group, the Art of Lawfare. We'll be talking about politics today, legal issues related to that, as well as the manosphere more widely and how politics and legal matters relate to the manosphere and your fellow manospherians, all of us, regardless of what the specific issue in front of us is. Joining me today will be one guest, a returning member to the show, one of our most beloved guests of all time, one I get pestered about all the time to get him back on the show more frequently. That is the one and only DDJ, aka Doomsday Jesus, aka Bob Lewis, author of The Feminist Lie. Get it on Amazon.com ASAP. Without further ado, welcome back to the show, the legendary DDJ. What's up, bro?
Nothing much, man. How you been?
Doing pretty good, man. I've been good. Chilling in Florida, windows open, weather's nice.
Nice.
Country's burning to the ground, but Florida's doing well. So,
right.
Yeah, man. How you been? What you been up to? It's been a while.
Well, there's been some major changes for me. So I was planning on, I've been kind of putting my nose to the grindstone with paralegal work because I wanted to save up for a house. And when I say save up for a house, I wanted to buy a house on the one payment plan. And I decided that I was going to speed that process up a little bit, given how bad things are in the tier 1, tier 2 cities across the country. So I purchased a bit of a fixer-upper and been spending some time getting it up to speed, setting up my studio, and getting ready to do some more videos. In fact, it's funny that you mentioned this because when you were talking to me about coming on the show today, I was in the process of actually doing a video on this very subject. I mean, it's a very similar subject.
Yeah.
And so that video is recorded.
I'll be happy to share it.
Yeah, that video should be out later today, and probably primarily on BitChute, but it can be shared, and anybody who wants to share it, that's fine.
Cool. Yeah, man, glad to have you back. I really have had a lot of guys throughout the channels, like, where's DDJ at? When's DDJ coming back? So it's good to have you back, man, 100%. And I should have mentioned, too, that you've spent, 15 plus years as a paralegal, a lot of experience, which, is not an attorney, but, 10 times, 100 times the experience of what anyone else in the manosphere theory jockeying about a lot of legal matters comes up with, right? Whether it's divorce court or election stuff, no one has a fucking clue half the time.
Well, and I think that the other piece of that a lot of people don't understand is that, when you have an experienced paralegal compared to, let's just say, an attorney right out of law school, a lot of these attorneys, they don't know the civil procedure. They don't know rules of evidence. They don't know the personalities of the courts. And they've never actually had that kind of real world experience that you really need to be successful in the legal field. The advantage of having a paralegal, a seasoned paralegal, somebody like me, is that you can kind of help guide through that process. You can guide that attorney through that process. And even though most attorneys have a level of critical thinking that surpasses a lot of paralegals, again, without having the context of real world experience, it's very difficult for them to navigate those waters.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of the other day? Was it 2 days ago now? I think it was Jenna Ellis or one of the attorneys, working for Trump right now. They did like the press conference, big one. And she commented that, the media more or less expects it to be like the 60-minute episode of Law and Order, like a cop TV show, right? Or with attorneys or some shit. And I think the average person, they call it the low information voter, that is in a lot of ways how their view of the court system and legal issues has been shaped and formed by propaganda. If not propaganda, then just, you don't have to go that far, that is fiction. Right. And things do have to wrap up in 44 minutes for a fucking TV show. It's fucking ridiculous.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm going to tangent a little bit because this is something that I've thought about a lot. And I've talked with a lot of people about this probably throughout the years, really. And that is, back in the day, newspapers were written so that somebody with an elementary school education could read them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So what that required people to be able to write concisely, write considerately, and to write articulately. And we don't see that in today's day and age. We see a lot of people, especially in the manosphere. Well, Law and Order is propaganda, absolutely. Special vagina unit, for example. But my point is that I think that, you know, when you talk about the medium, today the medium is the message. So before we would read newspapers, then it came to television, and now it's on the internet, and everybody wants to digest things at a certain pace or very slowly, for example. And I think that that's a huge challenge for anybody who wants to have any meaningful conversation, because, you know, I'm 50 years old, and I remember in high school, you know, we took classes in high school for critical thinking and for civics. They don't teach either one of those subjects anymore. They teach people, oh, look, you can be intelligent, you can have all these big words, you could be extremely articulate, but you don't know how to think.
Yeah.
And so I always use the train track analogy. So you put a man on a set of train tracks, right? And his knowledge tells him that he's on a train track. I'm sorry, his intelligence tells him that he's on a train track. His knowledge tells him that if he doesn't get off the train track before the train comes, he's going to die. But wisdom tells him to get off the train track before the train comes. And the reason I bring that up is because you always hear the conversation about IQ, and on the left you hear the conversation about education or knowledge, or, you know, or academic learning. Well, without wisdom and without the ability to critically judge each set of circumstances, you don't have the skills you need to make the best decision. And so maybe you might make a really good short-term decision, but the long-term consequences far surpass any positives that come with any short-term decisions you may have. And I think that that's extremely important, because, you know, and this came through in the press conference the other day, is that the challenge here is keeping people's attention span. And we are primarily we primarily get our information now from video, but we don't read books anymore. We don't actually take the time to learn. And a lot of people, they become the worst kind of pseudo-intellectual, where they end up repeating somebody else's platitude, critical thinking free.
Yep.
Without coming to their own conclusions, without actually thinking about what it is that they do. And it's so bad.
I've had this conversation, if I can interject here,
Go ahead.
with normie friends, you know, not very familiar with the manosphere, just normie, you know, whatever, normies.
Yeah.
And you'll hear them talk about, you know, whether it's politics or some other issue not directly related to politics, like overpopulation or other feminist conspiracy theories. And you can tell that the words they're saying are literally just regurgitated vomit that they heard on TV. They're not even like changed a little bit. Sometimes they're just directly like, I heard this like 8 days ago on CNN or some shit, and I'm going to say the exact same line. Zero processing of the information, zero critical, you know, analysis of it, no pushback. Just my brain is so open that my brains are, you know, my mind is so open that my brains are falling out of my ears, as Ayn Rand used to say. And that's
Right.
that's how these people operate. They're vomiting. They're getting vomited at digitally on TV or whatever, and then they're vomiting shit back out of you in real life. And they live by it too, with overpopulation. Like, I've heard young couples say they want to adopt a kid because of overpopulation instead of having children, and I'm like, that is the most lunatic fucking shit I've ever heard. I'm not opposed to them adopting a kid, but refusing to biologically breed due to this bullshit, you know, it's just insane.
Well, I think it's a question of virtue signaling, and it's also a question of multi-generational indoctrination and propaganda. And I think that the big challenge we have today is that we are thug and thought culture inform the left.
Yeah.
And that's the, I mean, if you look on the right, you know, especially the evangelical right, you know, they idolize Jesus, they idolize God, they idolize the family, they idolize, and I'm talking about the traditional conservatives. I'm not even referring
the founding fathers too. I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of great historical figures.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about conservatives, and I'm not talking about, you know, the original alt-right. See, what a lot of people don't understand is that the original alt-right wasn't the whole neo-Nazi moniker. The original alt-right were basically center leftists. They were people who, you know, they were okay with abortion, they were okay with homosexuality, they were okay with all those things. And then the alt-right got co-opted. But I mean, you know, given that Richard Spencer's a prominent voice, I mean, maybe they didn't stray too far away from their homosexual roots. But that said, just saying, I think that the big challenge here is that thug and thought culture have undermined our ability to educate ourselves. And without being able to educate ourselves or being able to critically think, we don't have the ability to make the decision for what's best for us as individuals, what's best for us as a family, what's best for us as a community, and really what's best for us as a country. You hear prominent politicians saying things along the lines of, well, in order to make our country stronger, we need more illegal immigrants. It doesn't matter if they're criminals, doesn't matter if they're serial rapists, doesn't matter if they're cartel drug dealers. We just need them. Because diversity is more important than safety, and diversity is more important than our communities.
Is our strength, and unlimited diversity, infinite diversity to infinity and beyond.
Yeah, and the reality is that really the strength of the United States is not a diversity; it's just the opposite. It's assimilation. That's why when the Irish came over and we celebrate St. Patty's Day, that's why when we agreed to work with the Mexicans and the Latinos, and we talk about Cinco de Mayo or tacos or burritos, or Taco Bell is one of the biggest fast food restaurants in the world. The Italians, who doesn't love lasagna? So there's a lot of things that we've assimilated into American culture that are now integral to American culture. But the problem that you have is that on the left, they want everybody to take their news in not only in a vacuum, but in like these microbursts. So 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, you hear all these people talking about how, or let's just even go back 6 months ago. Okay. The left was like, don't do COVID lockdowns. Don't shut the border. Don't do any of these things. Don't worry about COVID. It's a joke. You fast forward, and now they're talking about coming up with another lockdown and isolating everybody, even though the evidence suggests that the lockdowns aren't any good. So, now, and I say that, and this is just a huge tangent, but I say that because I think it's important to have this context and to be able to have this conversation, because if we're going to talk about a subject of international importance, because where the United States goes, the world follows, what we're going to have is we're going to have this conversation about how do we learn, how do we read, how do we educate ourselves, and are we open-minded enough to find common ground with people that we disagree with in order to deal with it? And the sad part about it is, go ahead, I'm sorry.
That is a great point. So, can we find common ground in these things? So I wanted to take a step back here before we get even further into the conversation with that point. I get a lot of pushback, not too much, but enough that it's noticeable. I'm not the first person to get it, but I get pushback for any kind of political posting with 21 Studios, right? And people say, oh, the manosphere has to be apolitical, needs to be apolitical, blah, 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 blah. Apolitical.
Sure.
And it's not even, some of them are genuine. Some of them I think are not. They're leftists masquerading as this apolitical neutral thing. And really, it's not so much a neutral position as it is a neutering position, is what it feels like. They want to neuter any kind of teeth to the manosphere. Kind of like you saw it in the Republican Party, right? It used to be filled with nothing but conservatives and these neoconservatives and all these fucking losers that are anti-American scumbags. And any kind of push for an American first and a patriotic thrust of the party that was assertive and aggressive was shut down for years until Trump came along. And we've seen some major changes now in the past couple of years in 2016, right? The Trump phenomena. So what are your thoughts? You're the first man I've ever seen in the manosphere push back sufficiently against this apolitical narrative to the manosphere that seems to have come out of nowhere, somewhere along the course of the manosphere. And it's like this gospel. I think it's just stupid. I think overwhelmingly the manosphere too is pro-Trump when you actually poll, right? It's like 70% Trump.
Right. And I think we have to go back and we have to look at history a little bit. When I talk about history, I'm actually referring to YouTube content creator history, online history, those types of things. And
are feminists apolitical?
No, they are not.
Oh, really?
And that's where I'm headed. So, back when the internet was a lot younger, Gamergate, those types of things, people became somewhat political, but they became political about this issue. And the majority of the internet were a bunch of center leftists. They were not right-wing personalities at all. I mean, there were some that were out there, but they were the outliers rather than anything else. And rather than move to the right, like a lot of people did, people realized that the left was actually moving farther to the left. So even the DNC came out and said, you know, if you're not pro-transgender, which by the way is science denial, if you're not pro all these other different things, well, guess what? We're leaving you in the dust. You're no longer welcome in the Democratic Party. And I think that that's a huge that should be a huge canary in the coal mine for a lot of people. And the other side of it is that, you know, look, you know, in the MGTOW community, especially 2-3 years ago, you would get a lot of traction if you made gotcha videos that made fun of feminists and things like that. And sometimes, you know, those online decisions that you made or online videos that were made, online communications that happened, especially on places like Politically Incorrect, they would have real world consequences. Like you look at Shia LaBeouf, that was hilarious, but it changed the way people did things. And while everybody on the internet sat and laughed and went, ha, 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 and they went back to their beer, the left said, no, we need to make laws against this. We need to change the way people perceive this. And so what they did, and what I saw, especially when I came online with TFM the first time in April 2017. I started my own channel in late October of 2017, and started making content on and off since then. And what I saw was that everybody was going after anybody who spoke out against left-wing totalitarianism. And you know, if you didn't like censorship, that's a problem. And the gaslighting was real, and it was top down. And I saw it as this major issue. In fact, my very first video was about the social media constitutional crisis. And the reason that I brought that up is because the reality is let's say I find somebody on the internet that I want to debate, and maybe there's somebody that the left doesn't like. We'll just call them, you know, our totalitarian overlords. It's somebody that they don't like. And of course, my message is not palatable to the left. Well, if we want to have our debate, we can't even debate amongst ourselves to test our own theories, because they're going to censor us both. Now, the reason that that's important is because we have constitutional rights. We have a right to freedom of speech. We have a right to free exchange of ideas. Christians have a right to religious freedoms. And the Congress is barred from enacting any law that allows for the abridgment of freedom of speech or the abridgment of freedom of
most state constitutions forbid this as well at a state level, right?
Right, but the thing is that the federal Constitution in this element of the First Amendment is the strongest, because it prevents the Congress from not just from censoring speech, but it prevents the Congress from enacting laws that censor speech. So let's just say you and I hated each other, right? Well, you can't tell me to go fuck myself, and I can't tell you to go fuck yourself if both of us are censored, or if one of us is censored and we want to tell each other to our face online, so to speak. Or even, you know, if I go to 21 convention and somebody wants to debate me there, maybe there's an open debate forum that you choose, you know, in future years to have. Well, and you want to stream that online, you now can't do it because there's these censorship policies in place that prevent it. Well, the problem that you're having now is that the free speech loving patriotic Americans have found ways around it through Gab, through Minds, through BitChute, through a lot of these other platforms. And while your reach is not as big per se, the reality is that your engagement is far higher.
Yeah.
So let's say,
hang on a second though. The big tech is, in my view, some sort of pseudo monopoly, maybe even an outright monopoly. They have tried, and they will continue to try, and they could succeed, right? They have tried to kill off these alternative platforms mercilessly.
Oh yeah, and I'm getting to that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that because these alternate platforms exist, that is a threat, and because look. That is the ultimate admission of defeat. When you have to censor people and you have to wage full spectrum warfare against them, the challenge is this. That's an admission of defeat. That's complete communism. Well, family law has been doing this for 30 years. Family law, it's not about winning custody of the kids or child support. When you go into family court as a man, they're trying to wage full spectrum warfare against you. They are trying to destroy your life. They charge you on child support. It's a completely unfair court system toward men. And it is that way by design. Well, and the challenge you have now today is that I can't share my thoughts. I can't earn my money. If let's say all I did was earn my money online, I can't earn my money online now because these bitches are censoring me. So hold on. Let me finish my rant real quick. Okay. Then I can slip off my soapbox for you. But my point is that now it's gotten to the point where people are being doxxed. They're being harassed in their real life. Their jobs are being contacted. Their social group is alienating them. And it's full spectrum warfare, just like the bitches in the family law court. Well, the only response to that, if you really think about it, is the only way that men, that red pill women, that, whatever you are, the only way that you can stand against this is to be political. And if you are an American in the United States, you have a United States citizenship, and you are over the age of 18, why aren't you registered to vote if you haven't been? And more importantly, if you're registered to vote, why aren't you voting? The reality is that in most jurisdictions, especially in off years for local and state elections, the participation rate is somewhere between 15 and 30%. So you have these people. Let's just say you have two candidates, right? Because a lot of places are doing top tier or top two primaries now. So you have one Republican, one Democrat as your top two who go to the general election, and only 30% of the people who have voted. And the winner gets 20% of, or let's say they get 80% of that vote or 70% of that vote. So the reality is that they're only getting 20% of the population's approval to take office. Okay. They're not representing the people. When you only represent 20% of your constituents and half of them have been lied to, that's a problem. So that's why you have to wage lawfare. Everything else has failed. This is what the left has done. And I always tell people, look, if you're going to bring controversies to my doorstep, I'm going to really pay attention to what it is you're doing and how it is you're doing it. Because the reality is that in war, and anybody who's been in a real firefight knows this, you don't set the rules. But you have to play by the rules that are put in front of you. You have to adapt to those circumstances, and you have to be able to deal with this. And I quickly realized, as a paralegal with lots of years of family law experience, was that lawfare is what the left did. They filed a series of lawsuits from the 1960s all the way even through today. President Trump by himself has been the subject of over 400 lawsuits just since he's taken office. Damn. That is outrageous. In fact, think about that for a second. Over 400 lawsuits. Now, here's another question you got to ask yourself. We've been in the middle of a recession and recovering a recession for an extremely long time. That I would say probably a good number of those lawsuits were filed by state AG, county prosecutors or county attorneys and city attorneys and all these things. And guess what they're using to fund those lawsuits? Our taxpayer dollars. My taxpayer dollars, your taxpayer dollars are going to attack the government. What they're trying to do is they're trying to bankrupt the government. And then they go, oh, well, we don't have enough money to deal with this. This is a perfect example. In Denver, Colorado right now, perfect example. The Denver mayor, the city and county of Denver, the mayor, he said, I don't know, probably a month or two ago, we only have 6 months worth of revenue left in order for us to survive. And we're going to run out of money. We're going to go bankrupt. Okay. But what he didn't say was, we're going to stop funding illegal immigration. You see, the city and county of Denver have an immigration office that pretends as though that they think they're their own country. They don't understand that immigration is regulated by the federal government. And so they're sitting here and they're acting like they have some sort of, place to stand here. They don't. But they're spending millions and millions of dollars to fund illegal immigration. They have illegal immigrant liaisons and advocates in every branch of government. They even created their own new department to deal with it. So the police department has illegal immigration advocates. Denver Human Services has illegal immigration advocates, as does Department of Child Support and those types of things. Well, the problem is if you cut out all that fat, and you stop funding federal crime, because illegal immigration is a federal crime. You stop funding that. Well, guess what you have left? You now have money to fund your voters, to fund your citizens. And when these people go into office, they take an oath not only to their communities, not only to their state law, but to the United States Constitution. And they're in clear violation of it. And the only way that you can stand by, or the only way that you can stand up, I should say, to these types of things is you have to be politically active and politically involved. And as an adult, that's something that's huge. And part of that political involvement means lawfare. Sometimes you have to file First Amendment lawsuits. Sometimes, I mean, like the People versus Larry Flynn, people wanted pornography. And they said, well, we don't want this because, you know, our panties are in a bunch and it gives men an outlet that they shouldn't have. And, you know, Larry Flint said, okay, well, go play hide and go fuck yourself. He took him to the United States Supreme Court and he won. Now we have porn. So, and I'm not saying that porn is good or bad. I mean, it's a double-edged sword like anything else. But I think that when you're having these conversations about our liberties, no one's protecting our liberties except us. We are the heroes we have been waiting for. No one's going to stand by. I mean, you look at Kyle Rittenhouse, the hero of Kenosha, and, you know, he's out on bail. The reason he's out on bail is because we all amplified his voice and we all amplified the truth.
Pillow Man paid a lot of his bail, actually. Mike Lindell, the Pillow Man.
Yeah, and also Ricky Schroeder.
Who's Ricky? I saw that. I don't know who that is, though.
He's an old school child actor who got old.
Okay.
But the point is that we as individuals are the ones who make this work. We make the Constitution work because we have to defend it. And part of that defending it is we amplify the voices of the individuals we care about. We amplify the voices of those who are fighting. We support them.
For the 4 boxes, right? Soapbox, ballot box, jury box, ammo box. Sounds like you're focusing on the jury box, which is just a loose analogy for lawfare, essentially, right?
Right. But the thing you have to remember, though, is that all those boxes have to work at the same time. The left is not fighting. The left is fighting a full spectrum war. And so we're clear. When I say leftists, I'm talking about globalists. I'm talking about communists. I'm talking about people who are un-American. I'm not talking about just quote unquote Democrats. OK, there are people in the Republican Party who are communists. Mitt Romney, I'm looking at you. You know, it's those types of people who they've practiced entryism into the Republican Party, and they're trying to undermine the Republican Party, and they've been going out of their way to undermine Trump. The way we fight back, and the way we fought back in 2016 was at the ballot box.
Yep.
You know, we voted, and they said, "Oh, we can't have that." So now you've got violent thugs running through the street in the form of Antifa, in the form of BLM, in the form of communism. And these are well-funded, well-paid, well-organized, well-coordinated individuals. And what they're doing is they are practicing terrorism. If you look at the most basic definition of terrorism, it is political violence. So people are trying to go vote and they're being harassed at the voting box. They don't want to get assaulted. People try to hold a peaceful rally. You know the difference between a left-wing rally and a right-wing rally? And I use the term left-wing euphemistically. A left-wing quote-unquote rally, they show up with shields, they show up with helmets, they show up with riot gear, they show up with weapons, they show up with incendiary devices. Yet those are the peaceful protesters. If you look at that and you compare it to a patriotic American protest or a Christian protest, those people show up in their street clothes. They're not looking for violence. They're not prepared for violence. They're not acting for violence. But the left is prepared for violence because they know they're going to bring it. And that's why you see independent journalists on the ground in the last probably 6 to 8 weeks. Independent journalists are getting assaulted because if BLM through their Antifa campaign can't control the narrative, then they have to beat the shit out of somebody. They don't care. They want to kill people. The reason why more people haven't died is because these people are bitches. They're bitches and they don't really know how to fight. They don't understand how to fight. But we've seen murders. There was a murder in Portland where the Patriot guy got ambushed. That is happening. And I can tell you right now that from what I've seen on social media across all platforms, we are only being told probably 10 to 20% of all the incidents that are going on. So you have to understand, like I grew up in a very, very dangerous town and I was in 15 of 18 years of foster care. By the time I was probably 22 years old, and this is back in the early 90s, the local papers quit reporting violent crime. And the reason they quit reporting violent crime, their excuse was that we will create more violent crime if we talk about it. And it was massive violent crime where I lived, and they just quit reporting. And so the only
crime, there was a crime wave back in the 90s, right?
Well, it was a huge crime wave, and it was from the 80s to the 90s. But the thing that you have to remember is this: if you really want the news, you have to read it from all sources. And I get some of my best news about the United States from outside the country, from Australia, from Europe, from China, like the Asian Times and those types of places. You have to go everywhere to get your news because you have to be able to piece it together. And the sad part about it is that we're not hearing the full story. And like you said, it's really important. And I want to make this point that's really super important. There's a lot of big-brained attorneys, legal minds who have YouTube channels on the internet. And I'm not going to mention their names, but you have to understand when you hear all this conversation about, the Law and Order episodes or the trial by PR arguments that the left-wing propaganda engines are making. And I'm talking about, CNN, the Communist News Network, MSDNC, all those places. And even Fox News now, in many elements of Fox News. The issue that you're having is these big brain legal minds, they're not setting the record straight.
Yep.
They are not following their own rules of professional ethics by telling people, look, here's how this works. No, they're sitting there and they're like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. Pay me, join my Patreon.
You mentioned Fox News a minute ago, and there's a whole fiasco with the whole network. But what really stuck out to me just a couple nights ago is Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson, Tucker Carlson cucked out. Now he went after Sidney Powell, one of the attorneys working for Trump, right? This amazing Texas chick, right?
Yeah.
Savage as fuck. I love her to death. And he went after her. It was a big surprise because it seemed, well, number one, there was a couple of issues with it if you watch the segment. One of them was kind of a gotcha thing, right? He's asking for all this evidence, and it's like, for why the fuck do you deserve all this evidence? You're a fucking TV show. This isn't. They're trying to go to court and win actual legal battles. Your TV show ratings don't really matter too much here. 100-1 compared to a legal battle. This woman's a real attorney trying to fight a real legal battle.
Well, and let's have that conversation because I think that I was kind of headed there, but you kind of headed me off of the path. So, okay. I think a really solid baseline that we need to look at is we really need to look at the lawsuit where Sargon of Akkad was sued in New York. Okay. He was sued for defamation. He made a funny video and they're like, I'm going to get you, and it was, I don't know, it was like Jigaboo Frankenstein was suing him.
I remember this. Actually,
right. Yeah. Right. Well, people forget why Sargon won. Carl Benjamin won that lawsuit. Not really because they never got to the merits of the defamation, even though it was always fair use. But the reason they never got to the merits of that is because Jigaboo Frankenstein decided she wanted to go ahead and she wanted to litigate this in the court of public opinion. So she made all these horrible comments about him. She started running her mouth and, I'm doing this because I want to destroy him and this and this and that. And you just, and all the left-wing vitriol we hear from like Antifa and Black Lives Matter and every other enemy of our Constitution. Okay. With that said,
got pulled up here about
that. Sargon took all that information, had his attorney file it in court and go, look, she went after me for malicious reasons. And they're like, you're right. Case dismissed. And she ended up paying him like over $50,000.
Wow.
So the reason I bring that up is because if Sidney Powell or Trump's team,
shit. 38,000 just in attorney fees.
Yes. Yeah, she got hammered. She got super hammered. And so the reason I bring this up is because seasoned attorneys and seasoned legal minds know that if you're in the middle of a lawsuit, there's a reason I haven't talked a lot about my Google lawsuit. If you're in the middle of a lawsuit and you're publicly saying that you're acting in bad faith, or you say things that could be misconstrued as though you're acting in bad faith, the court is going to sanction you for it. And you're never going to get to the merits of your case. You're never going to get to the arguments of your case, and you're never going to go from there. And the reality is, when you file a lawsuit, you're not required to present evidence. People don't understand that. Like, you file a civil suit, all you have to present are allegations that, if true, constitute what it is you're trying to sue for. In other words, your causes of action, right? So you're never going to get evidence in a lawsuit until you get to the discovery phase of the lawsuit. So basically, I'm being super layman, break it down thing. So all you legal minds out there who, I don't know, have no life, or, you take exception to what I say because, I don't know, your pussy hurts. Anyway, get over it. Pardon me. So the way a lawsuit works is you send a demand letter, and they usually blow off the demand letter. Then you send a complaint and a summons, and you serve the other side. Now you're in the middle of a lawsuit once they're served, because everybody's brought under the jurisdiction. Usually the defendants are going to file a motion to dismiss of some kind. Once you pass that stage, you do a couple pretrial things. Then after that, you get into what's called the discovery phase. This is where you issue subpoenas. This is where you do interrogatories, which are questions that are written that have to be answered by the opposing party under oath. And you do depositions and those sorts of things. And you ask for records and documentation and that kind of thing. Those things are relevant. Once you have those things in hand, that's your evidence. Okay, so you're already deep in the middle of the lawsuit, possibly months, and depending on certain circumstances, years in the lawsuit. You now have your discovery. Once you have that, now you go to trial and you prove your case. So for anybody on the left, or Tucker Carlson, or anybody like that who says, oh, well, there's no evidence and here we go. Well, the reality is that in a court of law, especially during pretrial, affidavits are considered evidence. Affidavits under oath, affidavits under declaration, under penalty of perjury that are notarized. Those are considered evidence in pretrial hearings, and even in post-trial hearings, of course. And so the thing that I think that's interesting about this whole Tucker Carlson scenario is that I was able to go to Court Listener, and I was able to pull up the Georgia lawsuit. You can go there. It's public record. And in most cases in a federal lawsuit that's filed in federal court, you need to have what's referred to as a PACER account, which is like basically it's like an account that you use to access federal court files, and you pay for your searches, you pay for your documents you download, that kind of thing. Well, Court Listener, the majority of the documents that I looked at for that Georgia lawsuit that's being filed by the administration, you can download most of those documents as PDFs. And I read some of those documents about Venezuela and things like that, but I even took it a step further. And in fact, last night I recorded a video. I'm in the process of editing it. I'm hoping to release it later today. But in that video, I talk about how Venezuela was actually working with Smartmatic and working with Dominion. And so, and these were cables from WikiLeaks that were dated July 2006. Okay, this isn't new.
Wow.
They knew this. In 2004, they knew this. The Democrats do it in 2019 when Democratic senators contacted, I believe it was HIG Capital in a group letter where they said this is a concern. The Philippines had the same problem where their elections were manipulated. Hell, even John Oliver, the comedian who's so full of shit, he had a wastewater treatment plant named after him, right? Yeah. Okay. So he, in 2019, in November, did probably better journalistic reporting on this very issue than any mainstream media outlet, with the sole exception of, in general, with the one exception of Tucker Carlson the other night, with the exception of Tucker Carlson in general. And in the 20 minutes, while it was kind of sarcastic and humorous, it really did a deep dive. And they actually showed where the voting machines, I believe it was in Iowa or Indiana, they plugged in 300 votes, and they got like 4 million votes in return.
Whoa.
Okay.
Whoa.
Okay. And most of these programs are using Windows 7. Okay. Mm-hmm. Windows 7 is about as secure as a street prostitute bent over naked on a street corner in the worst part of Detroit with her butt gaping in the wind.
Microsoft doesn't even support it anymore. All the security updates stopped for it a year ago or a couple of years ago or something.
A couple years ago. Yeah. And that's my point, though, is that these people are, I mean, look, Windows 7, when it came out, wasn't secure. Everybody knew that. So this idea, though, that there's no evidence. I've seen Tucker Carlson do investigative journalism on stories with far less evidence than what I've personally seen.
Wait, that's a really good point, though. He's an investigative journalist or an opinion, journalist, whatever the combination you want. He's primetime fucking news guy, right? It's his job to look for fucking evidence, right? That's what pissed me off with him in Sydney. Is he's just like, I guess, blasting her phone, like, give me the fucking evidence. and she gave him something like an affidavit that hadn't even
Well,
filed yet. And then she's like, "Fuck off! Like you're being rude, and I don't owe
well,
you shit." Like
I have a
you're gonna have to
feeling.
go find it.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that part of the issue there was that they were having a personality conflict between the two of them.
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
she's been on Lou Dobbs.
Yeah.
She's coming on Janet Perino later today.
Yeah.
Um,
She's even been on other Fox News stuff. They're not
Right.
we're assholes, and even there,
Right.
she's like, "Well, this and that." Yeah, Tucker, I don't know, what curled up his ass and died, but something happened.
You know, I'm willing to give Tucker a pass on this, and you have to pardon me. I'm kind of chewing a little bit. I've got a bit of a sore throat, but I'm willing to give Tucker a pass on this, and let me explain why. Antifa came to his house and tried to kick the door in and assault his wife.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, he's been falsely sued. He was falsely sued, and he was named in a lawsuit, and the lawsuit never even alleged it was a sexual harassment suit. The lawsuit itself never even alleged that he harassed anybody. They have done a full court, full spectrum, scorched earth war against Tucker Carlson. So if he's a little stressed and maybe he loses a little bit of a bedside manner, and he fucks up, he's human. I'll give him a pass for that. Now, I disagree with his choice.
Yep.
I disagree with the idea that, oh, give me the evidence. Motherfucker, you got a multi-million-dollar journalistic investigation team, okay? Change your diaper, pull the binky out of your fucking mouth, and do your fucking job.
Not to mention, a month and a half ago, not even, he lost evidence with the Hunter Biden shit, right? He tried shipping it, and then it got stolen. Like,
I think that was a honey trap.
Yeah, whatever it was. I mean, he seems to have a problem with holding on to evidence. Like,
well, no, what I mean by that is I think that he thought that there was a concern. So I had seen some Twitter DMs from between him and some other people, and he thought that there was a leak in his team.
Got it.
So he sent this across country after they had already backed it up, because he made it seem like, oh, we don't have any copies. So he sent it across country. Somebody grabbed it, took it, did something with it, and went, ha, 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 we got your evidence, and now you're full of shit. And we've seen this many times before, okay? I've even had it happen to me. I did a live stream, and in the middle of my Twitch stream, it was false flagged down in hopes that my stream, it would delete it off the internet. But I was already out doing the download process, and I uploaded it later. And like for probably 30 minutes, my mod team and everybody, we were all getting harassed. We were all getting threats of docs and go into our house and death threats and all this other stuff. And then once the video came up, all of a sudden, all those voices went away, because the lies that were told about me couldn't be proven anymore. And they were like, oh, he's not going to upload a video. Well, it's because they tried to engineer it that way. So all I'm saying is that while I disagree with Tucker Carlson, I believe he made a bit of a mistake. It's very clear that he had a personality conflict with Sidney Powell. Yeah. And the reality is, we don't have the luxury right now to have a pissing contest between two allies. We need to come together, and we need to say, look, let's have that pissing contest later. Let's table it for now, and let's see if we can protect our country. Because the more disarray that we have, and the more drama tubers that are out there who are trying to create unnecessary drama and division and demoralization, the more effective that they will be. And we really have to protect the country. We have a very limited time frame to do it. And if they take Georgia, and the Democrats take Georgia, they've got, Biden, who can't even have a dozen people, meet for him as president. They've got a thin superior margin, the Democrats in the House, and they'll have the Senate. So they'll have all three. And not only are they going to roll back everything Trump's done in the last 4 years, but they're going to usher in a new wave of socialism like this country has never seen.
I think they're going to go right for communism. They're going to, if they get everything you're saying, the Senate too. I mean, they're going to push in. I think they're going to push to abolish the Electoral College. Would be hard, but they'll push for it if they can.
Well, but you also have to understand, though, that we currently live in a Chinese style social credit system. If you're guilty of wrongthink, people are calling your boss and say, oh, you need to fire this person, or you're getting banned off of social media. Your voices are being stifled. You've got people firebombing your house. There have been police officers across the country, which has not been talked about, who have had their families terrorized. They've had their houses vandalized. One officer, I believe, had his house burnt down. So this is happening. We are in the middle of an insurrection right now. And when I was telling you, I've been quiet for a few months. I was planning on coming back about 2 months ago. But when I saw everything go completely sideways, I went out to a flyover state, and I bought a house on the one payment plan and said, I need to bunker down. And I think that anybody who has the ability to get out of a tier 1 or a tier 2 city, I think at some level, once you leave, those places will become self-cleaning ovens. Those people will, I mean, and you see it right now in Seattle. And sadly, there's a lot of innocent people right now in the Seattle area, in San Francisco, in Oakland, in all these big cities that are being terrorized. And they need to leave. They need to figure out a way to leave. And don't believe the hype. Don't allow these people to demoralize you. Lawfare is the key. And more importantly, instead of putting your money to YouTube content creators, whether it's myself or Redman Group or anybody else, if you really want to put your money where your mouth is, help fund these lawsuits. Help these attorneys, help these people who are trying to save the American way of life. You know, Harmeet Dillon is working for President Trump. There are a variety of local and state GOP organizations out there that are really pushing to protect our country. They're pushing to protect our constitutional rights. And that's why you're seeing, by the way, this second round of the COVID scam happening, because they have to demoralize everybody, because they have to shut everybody down, because now they've realized, oh shit, we didn't break their backs yet. Our goal was to do it Soviet style. If anybody who's watched my content, you'll know that I've talked about off and on. I talk about Yuri Bezmenov, and one of the things that Yuri Bezmenov talks about is demoralization and then crisis.
What's more demoralizing than canceling 2 major holidays? You get Thanksgiving and Christmas back to back. If they put in a lockdown that extend it by a week or two,
right? But the thing that people don't understand though is that those are symptoms, and what I mean by that is that institutions of American culture and American society are being attacked. Our churches are being attacked. Our holidays are being attacked. Our symbols of freedom and patriotism are being attacked. I mean, George Washington, from the Revolutionary time, his statue was knocked down. Abraham Lincoln, who emancipated the slaves, his statue was knocked down. They are going after symbols of American culture, American history, and American society. That is the demoralization. And then they're putting this fraudulent, and they openly admit it's fraudulent, this fraudulent history that, the United States was always racist, when the reality is that the United States was created to prevent racism. It was made to prevent this idea of, a caste system. Nobody wants to live in a society with a caste system where people are shitting on the streets and bathing in fucking cow shit ridden rivers. And Kyrgyzstan, I'm looking at you. So I think that, when we look at these sorts of things, we really have to say enough is enough. And lawfare is viable. Lawfare is important, and it is necessary. And there are attorneys out there willing to do it. Unfortunately, none of these attorneys on YouTube that I've seen, I'm not impressed with any of them. There was an attorney out there who said he was going to file an antitrust claim. Again, not going to mention his name, but he was very public about it. He took a bunch of money, set up a GoFundMe, said he was going to do it. It never happened. He pocketed the money and he dipped the fuck out like a con man. Damn. And while, we could sit online and do this sort of thing, I put my money where my mouth is. That's why I sued Google. That's why I'm in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals right now, taking this fight to them. And there are many other people out there who were like me. And maybe you don't have the legal knowledge that I do or anything like that. But the point is that patriots have to stand together, because the reality is we no longer have the luxury to argue between PUA and MGTOW or, traditional values and bachelordom or anything like that. We don't have that, because we can't have those conversations if we don't have freedom of speech.
That hits the nail on the head, and why I think the manosphere, it's this pseudo apolitical stance that some people are adamant about. It's retarded, because when the manosphere is formed in the 90s and the 2000s, when it was really more in the developmental phase, it's still growing and developing now, but it was much younger then. It was unthinkable that you would join, say, Facebook or YouTube in 2008, and that they would just ban you because you had the wrong opinion about feminism or globalism or communism or whatever, right? Or Facebook, when before MySpace died, can you imagine them banning you for some fucking hate thought crime bullshit? It was unthinkable in late Bush years, Bush administration, or even early term Obama. This was unthinkable that a major American company would do this shit. Facebook, Twitter, whatever the fuck, these big tech ones. Unthinkable. Unfucking thinkable. HBO now has been censoring and rewriting what Gone with the Wind or these fucking old movies and shit. They've been putting, these critical race theory openings to them and shit. It's insane. Growing up in the 90s, can you imagine 1999 HBO airing something to you that was going to censor or modify the speech of a movie? It was fucking insane.
Well, we for the last, I don't know, probably since Obama's hit office, I've been talking to a lot of people that I say we are living in cyberpunk. We are living in the dystopian cyberpunk genre style world where, you know, mainstream corporate voices are completely totalitarian, and those people who speak freely have to live on the fringes, or they have to live, you know, I don't want to say a life of crime, but, you know, the basically they're societal outcasts.
Yes.
And, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, there were many science fiction writers who wrote this sort of thing. And apparently the left took this as like, oh, that's a great playbook, let's use it. Like Orwell's 1984, for example.
So what you're saying, though, is that the manosphere is dead in the water without free speech, right?
What I'm saying is this, is that, look, there is no country in the world that has the freedoms, that has the Constitution, that has the level of patriotism that the United States has. Nobody has freedom of speech. Nobody has the right to bear arms. We are the only country in the world that has it. Okay? If you don't have the ability to have freedom of speech, you have nothing. If you can't enforce your freedom of speech with your right to bear arms, you have nothing. You're going to be, you know, some cucked European or Australian or, you know, Canadian shill who can't really speak their mind. And you're going to be living in a society where you have to be dishonest in order to survive. And parts of the United States, unfortunately, are already like that. They are this dystopian, dishonest, unethical nightmare where people have to, you know, have this foot race to see who can be the most unethical, who could be the most backstabby. And, you know, I mean, we even have TV shows, our culture and our TV shows like on Netflix and Amazon Prime. We have TV shows that lionize people who are just degenerate pieces of garbage. And so when you talk about the voices online, people don't understand, especially now with COVID and the lockdowns, our online communication is more important today than it's ever been in the history of the world, because everybody communicates through apps, through social media. It doesn't matter what social media you use. We all use these things to communicate. And we can't, with the manosphere.
Let's make a point here. That is unprecedented in human history, that the average person, male or female, would have a voice in the public square of any meaningful size, right? It was super rare.
And real quickly on that point, I don't think we should regulate big tech. I think all that does is that confirms their monopoly. All we have to do is we treat big tech platforms like publishers. We give them immunity for third-party content, not for censoring it, but just for, like, so let's say I get on the internet and I decide I want to post neo-Nazi stuff. Well, Facebook can't censor me for it. It's free speech. And they can't be sued for it because it's a waste. But no big tech company should be allowed immunity for censorship of anything unless it's illegal. In the United States, illegal, not New Zealand illegal, right? So this idea that we treat them like publishers, because that's what they're doing. They're making publishing decisions. They are de facto publishers, even though they run around, they deny it. The reality is, if we treat them the same way we treat newspapers and say, you can be sued for defamation for what you do, that's an issue. And here's the other kicker. People are saying, oh, well, you know, YouTube and you know, these other social media companies, they're private companies that can do what they want. Well, that's not quite true. The United States Supreme Court in Pakenham versus North Carolina in 2017 unanimously found that social media platforms were digital public squares where free speech should be protected. And in a time where we have this huge COVID crisis, that case law is so absolutely important. And by the way, Ginsburg voted for it before she died. Okay, that's how important free speech is.
Well, so how important free speech is, that's a really important thing. I mean, you could talk about this infinitely, right? People have written essays and books on it, obviously. But what comes to mind is that the Constitution was written, the First Amendment, as a part of the Bill of Rights, and all the state constitutions that have modeled after it. The number one, this comes literally number one in the Bill of Rights and in many state constitutions, right? But this right and this ability to speak, to think freely and to speak freely and to think with your mouth and, you know, speak out into the world, or with your fingertips writing or something, this is sacred. So sacred that we have forbidden government in America, throughout all the states and throughout the federal, you know, the Constitution. We have forbidden governments from interfering with it. Forbidden. And the reason I think for this, one of the reasons for this, is that the government was seen as the most likely threat to free speech. But I think what people miss, the point they miss, is that what we're protecting is free speech. It's not just about forbidding government from doing it. It's that free speech is an inherent value that we deeply, deeply care about in America, rightly so, and every country should, even if they don't now. So I think what a lot of people lose sight of when they say, corporations, they're private companies, they have free speech, blah blah blah. I don't give a fuck. Fuck them. Fuck you.
Well,
If
hold
I don't
on.
have the ability to speak freely as an American, we have a big fucking problem.
Well, and let's take it a step back though.
Okay.
The Constitution expressly forbids, in the First Amendment, people need to read it. The Constitution expressly forbids Congress from passing laws that abridge the freedom of speech. Now, it doesn't make any exception for private companies. Okay? So if the Congress delegates its censorship authority to a private organization, they're not allowed to do that either. There's no exception. Congress cannot delegate to others what it has no power to do itself.
And so you're saying that Section 230 has enabled private companies to censor on behalf of Congress, bypassing the First Amendment.
Correct. And I'm also saying that Section 230, because it expressly allows for the censorship of constitutionally protected material, it flies in the face of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution and is unconstitutional on its face.
Okay.
Because Congress was never allowed, constitutionally speaking, was never allowed to pass such a law. I mean, think about it for a second. Imagine having a law that says that that baseball stadiums or sports stadiums or malls, that when you walk into a mall, that they can just take your guns from you, right? Mm-hmm. You have a concealed carry permit or your law enforcement or something like that, and yet you show up to these places and they're like, oh no, you can't have your guns here. I mean, can you imagine? That's really what we're talking about.
The only thing they can do is ask you to leave, and if you don't leave, then it's trespassing. But that's it.
Right, but my point is that, when it comes to our Second Amendment rights, if you're in a place that expressly allows you to have firearms under the state law and under Constitution, if somebody says we don't allow guns here, it doesn't matter. Go play hide and go fuck yourself. We will sue you into the goddamn Stone Ages, which, by the way, is lawfare. So we have these conversations, and that's the reality. And these big tech companies and their mainstream media mouthpieces, they act as though they are countries unto themselves. They act as though they stand on par with the Constitution. They act as though they stand on par with the most powerful governments in the world. And unfortunately, many people have bent over and have let them. And we shouldn't. I mean, think about it for a second. How many schools, how many academic institutions use the Google laptops?
Yeah, a lot.
How many government organizations or taxpayer funded organizations use Google products for business? And Google's collecting all that data. I mean, their whole business model, and it's the same is true with Twitter. It's the same is true with Facebook. Their whole business model is Orwellian. It is surveillance state. It is. And they're like, oh, well, you agree to those terms. Well, let me ask you something. If I put a term in a contract and we're going to go into business together, and that term says I can rape you whenever I want, is that okay? Well, no, it's not okay. It's unconscionable. And our Fourth Amendment gives us a privacy right that says that basically, here you go. That's why we have, again, lawfare. That's why we have torts that say this contract is unconscionable. And let's talk about, like, for example, Google for a moment. If you go to Google's terms of service, their terms of service is one web page. And then they're like, you got to follow our community guidelines. So you click on the link to the community guidelines. Okay. So now you have the terms of service. And then under one layer of digital fine print, you've got their community guidelines. Now, underneath those community guidelines are 3 more layers of digital fine print. And I've done the homework on this. Do you know how big Google's contract is for usage?
Probably dozens of pages.
It is over 90 separate web pages.
Whoa.
And their terms say that those 90 separate web pages that you, the end user, are supposed to use, that they could change any of those terms anytime they want without notifying you. How is that not an unconscionable contract? How is that not concealing their terms in the digital fine print? And the reality is the contract, it doesn't actually include specific terminology. It includes terminology that is platitudes, like things like hate speech, for example. Well, what is hate speech? Well, it depends. If you're a mentally unstable communist, hate speech is different than if you're a mentally unstable Democrat. It's different than if you're a mentally unstable rhino. So,
well, according to the Supreme Court, though, hate speech is free speech.
It is.
This is settled case law from 2005.
Right. But then we go back to 230, and anything these organizations find is quote unquote objectionable, they can censor you for. Well, that's by the way, that's unconstitutionally overbroad. And these things
they fucked that up, right, when they originally wrote it.
They did, and let me tell you something. Those arguments that I talk about the unconstitutionality of these things, those things are included in my appeal. And those things, I mean, hopefully next February when we get oral arguments, these are going to be conversations we can have publicly. But I think that the thing that people don't understand is that lawfare is the key. It is the key, and if enough people do it, we can avoid civil war. So let me give you another example. So in 2017, when I first started appearing on the TFM show, one of the things I talked about, as I used to say, and I kind of coined the term, was sue them into the Stone Ages.
Yes.
And I started talking about false allegations of sexual assault, false allegations of domestic violence, false allegations of sexual harassment. I said, sue them into the Stone Ages. Make them prove what they say is true, or sue the ever-living fuck out of them and anybody who finances them, anybody associated with them. Basically, what you're trying to do is salt the earth like Carthage, right? And the reason that you're doing that is not because you're trying to be malicious, not because you're trying to be difficult, but because that is what they are attempting to do to you. Yeah. You have to do again, I don't make the rules, but if you come to my fucking table and you take a dump on my plate, don't expect for me not to play by the same rules. I'm happy to climb over the table and take it and drop trow on you because deuce is wild. But my point is that at the end of the day, when we have these conversations and we do this, you fast forward from 2017 to today, everybody's suing false accusers now. I was the only one saying it in 2017. Everybody is suing false accusers. You see Johnny Depp sued his ex, and he's going to have to go to the Court of Appeals. You see all these different people, or they're filing police reports now against them. So if somebody falsely accuses you and they file a false police report, which, by the way, in many jurisdictions is a felony, you could turn around and do the same thing back to them. And we were the only ones saying that 2-3 years ago. Now everybody's talking about it. Nobody was talking about the stuff about Section 230 or anything like that, except for me. I said it in October 2017. I was the only person to say it in that way. I was the only person to say it was a constitutional crisis. And I've said it consistently throughout my channel. Once the lawsuit got filed, now all of a sudden, there's like 10 bills before Congress right now, probably between 5 and 10 bills, where everybody knows they have to change 230.
Yeah, and that's because they might even repeal 230 in an upcoming COVID thing in the Senate.
Well, I don't think they're going to repeal it, because if they were going to repeal it, they'd be talking about my lawsuit. My lawsuit seeks to repeal 230. It says it's unconstitutional. It seeks to repeal it. And I don't think they want to do that. I think everybody's terrified. And since I filed the lawsuit initially in August of 2019, like once AG Barr got served in October or November of 2019, all of a sudden, everybody's changed their tune. You never hear about the quote unquote 26 words that save the internet bullshit story anymore, do you? You never hear about the pro bullshit. Even in the last Senate hearings, big tech has admitted, Section 230 needs to be changed. By the way, you know why Sundar Pichai from Google didn't show up at that last hearing? Because if he said that Section 230 needed to be changed, that would negatively impact their position on my appeal. That's why he didn't show up. He's like, fuck this, I can't say a word. So you have to understand, like, lawfare works. And yeah, many of the cases lose. And that's the thing that people don't understand. So like my case is a test case. And many of these cases, when they come up, their cases of first impressions or their test cases, or they come up with new spins on different arguments, and the case itself loses, but you change the conversation. So even if my case loses, I don't care, because I've changed the conversation. I've been able to have to push Section 230 into the public square where everybody can talk about it in a more credible, meaningful, and honest way. And honestly, at that point, I've done my job. And I think that a lot of people don't understand is that once people see the emperor has no clothes, everybody goes after him. So for example, there are 15 other YouTubers right now suing Google and YouTube specifically because of the free speech violations. We have the Department of Justice now with a new antitrust case, which takes elements of my lawsuit and incorporates it there. And they actually did their homework and have access to tools. Of course, I don't. So they were able to develop it in a way that I could never do as a private citizen. But my point is that you have to wage lawfare. The reason why feminism happened, the reason why we have abortion, the reason why all these people are in positions of power is specifically because of lawfare. So we didn't make the rules, but if we are to defend the republic, we have to incorporate what the enemy does and use it to our advantage.
I fully support that. So with that said, let's shift gears a little bit to a even bigger topic. We've been going for about an hour now. Let's talk about lawfare and the 2020 election. This is an electoral map from the Epoch Times that I think is the most accurate that we're currently seeing, and that's currently available from a news website, news outlet. So I have a bunch of questions I want to get through with you on this, but what is your basic take on what the fuck is going on with the 2020 election, with the counting that stopped on the night, continued after, all the lawsuits and press conferences that have been discussed since then? So what are your thoughts on what's going on with that and what we're seeing on this map here, which shows the gray ones are basically the ones that have not been called yet or have been contested, close, things like that. Initial take.
Well, my initial take is that like every other element of the American culture and the American identity, this is full spectrum warfare. So, for example, the Dominion voting machines, the Smartmatic voting machines, the Sequoia voting machines, and I'm talking about holistically. I'm not talking about specifically those machines, but those that use that software. That software is ripe. And again, from when people see my video on BitChute later today, I go into this in a lot more detail. But those voting machines were designed to allow voter fraud remotely and to allow voter fraud right up in your face physically at the machine level. They were baked into the software and they're baked into the hardware. As far as that's concerned, what I'm seeing right now is Arizona has said that they will not certify the election until all the lawsuits are there. Hopefully they stand by their guns and do that. As far as Michigan is concerned, I know that like the Trump campaign has only filed less than half a dozen lawsuits. There have been over 30 lawsuits filed. The majority of those lawsuits have been dismissed because of lack of standing. And part of it is because the election wasn't over yet. So there were no real damages, was part of the reason that standing was there. Those were correctly dismissed. But I think that we have a real danger here of them stealing the election because it's not just the software. It's the UPS worker or USPS workers, I should say, who are throwing votes away, or the guy who tried to take a bunch of votes to Canada, or the backdating votes, throwing them in the garbage. You've got people like the Dominion software vice president said, "Oh yeah, we're going to set this up," and Trump's not going to win no matter what. And this guy's like a vice president, or he's an upper level executive of Dominion, and he's also an Antifa guy.
Yeah, and just yesterday too. Speaking of Dominion, they were supposed to do a hearing with the.
They lawyered up.
Yeah, they lawyered up at the last minute. They were going to come in and do a talk, talk with these legislators, and then they backed out at the last second.
Well, and let's take it a step further.
Man. You got nothing to hide, bro. Just come have a chat, dude.
Right. Well, and here's the thing: on election night, almost all the Dominion machines or the Sequoia machines, almost all of them went down for 2 hours for a quote unquote update. Well, according to an affidavit that I read in the Georgia case, it takes about 2.5 hours to update the elections if you want to shift it from one to the other. And that's not all. Let's talk about, the people showing up in the middle of the night with ballots and garbage cans. And I think that
mafia style stealing.
Yeah, and again, a lot of this is circumstantial evidence. We don't know if it's all true yet. Let's be real honest about it. But I think the most telling thing.
Wait. This is a really important point. So you're saying, maybe there's no evidence of it here. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it did. What's interesting, though, is that no one says Joe Biden would never do this. The Democrats would never do this. Philadelphia would never do this.
No. What they're saying is the way they're framing it is you can't prove it. It's not we didn't do it. It's you can't prove it.
Yeah, it's not exactly. You can't prove it. We didn't do it. That's very different from we would never do that in a million years because we have integrity and all these things.
Well, and Biden admitted. He said they've created the largest voter fraud organization in the world. He admitted it.
Yep.
I don't think that was a Freudian. I mean, I don't think that was a slip. I think that was him just admitting it.
Yeah, him being a dumbass. Yeah, exactly.
Right. But what I mean by that is that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but we need to be able to do the discovery. And the reality is the FBI is not going to help. There's been an alphabet agency civil war going on ever since Trump took office. And everybody is fighting each other and they're undermining each other. And it's a problem. And then on top of all of that, in addition to those votes showing up, the question that the American people, I think, need to ask themselves, and this is the telling one, and that's this: how many elections have there been in the United States where one party has won all the downvotes, all the lower offices, but the president of the United States or one particular office went the complete opposite direction. You see, that doesn't make logical sense if you think about it in terms of human behavior and human habit. So in this case, there are states that are going to Biden, according to the corporate media and big tech, where the Republicans won in the House and they won in the Senate. So if they won in the House and they won in the Senate, and there were all these other things here, we need to compare those votes to the presidential election votes, because there are affidavits out there that said, look, we have these crisp, clean ballots that only are for the president, but they're not for anybody else. And here's the other thing that's an interesting thing. If you have an ID in multiple states, you can vote multiple times, and no one's smarter. So let's say I had an ID in Montana and Colorado and Florida. And let's say I lived in Missouri. I can request 3 absentee ballots and I can vote 3 times and send them all back.
Yep.
There's no security. You have to have ID to buy alcohol. You have to have ID to buy a gun. You have to have ID to walk into some buildings. You have to have ID to go into the Democratic National Convention. Well, if you have to have ID for all those places, then why don't we have voter ID? And don't give me this bullshit about how, it's racist, right? I mean, it's been used so much, it's turned into a platitude. Like 15-year-old boys now are drawing swastikas because they know it pisses people off. Like, nobody cares anymore. You guys have overused it. It's like, when big tech says, oh, it was a glitch or it was a mistake. Well, there's a translation there that needs to happen that most people haven't said. What they're saying is, fuck you, peasant. I'm going to do what I want. You need to obey. That's really what they're saying. They don't care. They think they're above the law. And as long as these alphabet agencies remain in civil war, and as long as the Fourth Estate abandons its duty and continues to carry water for these people, this stuff will continue. I just think that where we are today, we have to do lawfare. We have to go after these Democrats who are trying to steal the election. I know that, where's the evidence as far as that's concerned? There's plenty of circumstantial evidence. There's plenty of evidence to survive a motion to dismiss. But the problem
they're collecting it as fast as they can to present in a way that fucking matters. It's like, that's why the Tucker Carlson stuff, like, I'm not going to throw them out the window just yet. Right. But at the end of the day, you don't have the right to demand this stuff. You can ask for it, obviously, and you should desire it. He can also go out and find his own with his, multi-million-dollar fucking company he has behind him, assuming they're not sabotaging them and whatnot. Right. Yeah, it's just fucking ridiculous. Like, what matters is winning the legal stuff. The PR element of it is important. Like, I have no doubt that Trump and his team are fully aware of that. Well, but it's secondary to the legal stuff, right? Well,
and I think that what Trump needs to do is, because there's a lot of evidence that part of our voting machines are being influenced by foreign entities, like Dominion, for example. I don't know if they still have it, but they were founded by 3 Venezuelans with ties to the Venezuelan government. Their R&D department, like they have it in Panama, the Philippines, elsewhere. There's conversations about how some of the votes are being tabulated in Germany. I think what Trump needs to do, he needs to declare an insurrection. He declares an insurrection, and then as part of the insurrection, we need to do another vote, and it needs to be a manual vote. And part of the insurrection, he says, look, if you don't have an ID, you don't vote.
And paper ballots only, you're saying?
Paper ballots only, voter ID only. We have the military there, because there are credible reports of people telling voters how to vote, who to vote for. There are credible reports of people wearing Biden campaign paraphernalia and being at these voter
votes, not just being there.
Yeah, shit. Correct. Yeah. And then on top of all of that, you have people being assaulted for standing in line. So, and then you have the separate treatment where Republicans on the day of election were given Sharpies, but everybody who voted early was given a ballpoint pen. So we have to be able to defend ourselves. And again, we have to use the same full spectrum thinking that the Democrats and that the communists are doing. So the way that we do that is Trump declares an insurrection, and then he does another election. And he says it's paper ballot only, fuck voting systems, no vote leaves our shores. None. And we deploy.
This is an option that he has. I agree with you. I've heard a little bit about this, but he has several options on the table to victory. This is one of them that would probably be a last resort, right?
Well, I think he should do it first. I don't think you have time for a last resort. I don't think you have that luxury anymore. And I think the more the attorneys are sitting here trying to figure it out, I think the harder it's going to be. I mean, I said this in a video 2 years ago. I said, we are in the middle of an insurrection. You know, there is an American revolution underway, and it is basically communists and socialists trying to gaslight and destroy our institutions. And we're seeing it today. They're using the fake COVID pandemic to do it. I mean, it's really sad because the whole thing is a scam. And I'm not saying that like nobody like COVID doesn't exist. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if you're a healthy height and weight and you are under the age of like 10,000, your odds of living are like 99%. Okay. Yep. If you're fucking Yoda and you've got type 2 diabetes, odds are, and you're over 60.
I think you mean Jabba the Hutt.
Or Jabba the Hutt, exactly. And you're over 60, now you're in a risk, you know? And I think that that's a huge thing to talk about. I don't think we need to be pushing vaccines. I don't think we need to be, because again, you notice how the left moves goalposts. First, it was, we're going to do the lockdown to kind of level out the spread so we get herd immunity. Then they were talking about wearing the face diapers. Now they're talking about everybody needs to be vaccinated. And then it turns out that apparently these vaccinations have some sort of like nanochip in there where people can be tracked. So again, this is, and I'm not saying that all this is true. These are things that are being said around the internet and not just in conspiracy theory circles. These are serious concerns. We have to be able to put a stop to this. And the way you put a stop to it is the president declares an insurrection. He deploys the National Guard to voting locations. And you know what? Anybody who tries to harass a voter, when they put him in the cop car, they miss the door about a half a dozen times, right? You just miss the door, you know, and you finger paint with their bodily fluids, throw them in the fucking car, and you keep them there for 60 days, no bail.
Well, before we get to the Insurrection Act, though, what is DDJ's take on Sidney Powell? This is one of the lead, point women, so to speak, on the election fraud for Trump. What did you take on Sidney Powell? Patriot, traitor? What do you think? Competent, smart?
I think she's very competent. I think she's very smart. I think she's very patriotic. I also think she's very well paid. Okay. So, you know, I mean, she's been a prosecutor. She's a highly noted appellate attorney. I think putting a woman's face on some of this stuff, I think, is important because what it does is women can get away with saying things in public that men can't because of our cucked culture.
Yeah.
But I also think that, I mean, I'm sure at some level she's an opportunist, but you could tell she definitely cares about everything that's going on.
She was pretty successful with Mike Flynn too, right? General Mike
She was. So, I mean, I don't think she's quote unquote one of the bad guys per se. But for me, the jury's still out on her. And honestly, I think at this point we have to look at results rather than what pontification happens. And I know that there's a couple lawsuits that are coordinated. I know that the Trump campaign said they were going to file a bunch more lawsuits. We never seen them. We haven't seen them yet. And I know some of them are, you know, when they say we haven't seen them yet, some of that's not the Trump administration's fault because if the votes aren't certified or if the state is still counting them or something like that, then any lawsuit gets filed becomes premature and you end up losing credibility in the long run. So you kind of have to wait for the process to shake out. But I think that the problem that we're having though is that these people are they're just playing the clock. They're winding the clock down and they're running the clock so that there's no time to file these lawsuits, which is why I believe the tool forward is the Insurrection Act, because I believe that there are forces here, especially in like the state of Georgia, for example. So like, let me give you an example. In the state of Georgia, Stacey Abrams, you know, the black Jabba the Hutt, she's never won elected office in her life. She's a card carrying socialist and, you know, probably instead of vitamins eats donuts. But the point I'm trying to make is that, and she's never held government office. I think that's important to underscore. And here's why. Breitbart the other day did a news report where they cited her as their source. And she said, oh yeah, in the runoff election, there's 600,000 votes that have been requested. So that begs one question. If you don't work in government, you have no official position, how do you know how many absentee ballots have been requested unless you're part of the fraudulent group of the RICO group who requested them?
Well, you bring up RICO, so let's talk about Rudy Giuliani. He's someone who was successful, I think, in the 1980s and taking down the mob, essentially, I think using RICO or something like that.
He did. He's the godfather of RICO.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well put. Well, I never heard that before. Well put. What are your thoughts on Rudy Giuliani? Because I used to not be a fan of him. I thought he was a
I
neoconservative.
think first and foremost, I think he needs to get a hair dye that actually can withstand sweat.
Yeah, I got it.
You know, I think that's number one. I think number two, I think that he's a great attorney, and he's a patriot, and he deeply cares. I think the problem that we have, though, is when you have a man who has more testosterone in his system when he's 70 or 80 years old than the majority of millennial men out there, that says a lot about your culture.
Yep. Well put. And yeah, my opinion of him has changed too. I think since 2016, at least, he's really turned around. Some of these other guys too maybe have turned around. You know, these other senators and stuff got more bigger balls because of Trump. You know.
Well, I think that part of it is that they've also realized that what's being said is true. I mean, the nice thing about that 90-minute press conference the other day, which, by the way, I've reposted to my BitChute in its entirety, is that there were a lot of red pills dropped there. I think the most important thing about that press conference, at least for me as an online content creator, is that things that were only talked about in the manosphere, MGTOW community, some of these other communities, they were things that were only discussed in conspiracy theory communities, and people were harassed for even talking about these things. And the fact that he brought those things out in the light of day, that's a huge victory for some of the early voices like mine, because it basically is confirmation of what we've been saying sometimes for 5 and 10 years, on the internet, whether it's YouTube or Reddit or wherever. I think that's a huge win, because what it does is it gives a lot of credibility back to people who were falsely attacked before.
Got it. I'm trying to pull up another article here too that would be pretty interesting. I want to ask you about the Supreme Court.
Well, before you do, I got a website you can pull up.
Okay.
It's called hereistheevidence.com. So this guy decided that he wanted to show the evidence for everybody. Now, some of this evidence is not admissible in court. Some of it is in the form of articles by news outlets and reporting and that kind of thing. And some of it is court orders. And if you go to I have this in my video, and I kind of go to my video, but it's important to look at here. So if you look on the right-hand side, the higher the quality of the evidence, the more admissible it is. So number fours on the left and the right are admissible evidence. So like that first one is a court order.
What's the scale go? 1 to 4?
1 to 4, 1 being the lowest. And they have some where there's no scale because it's just rumors that they've heard. But I think that if people really want to look at this is a crowdsourced website that this guy built on his own, and it shows all the evidence, circumstantial and otherwise, of voter fraud and concerns about voting issues throughout the country. Yeah,
I've been tracking a lot of this stuff through the Donald and Twitter, but this is really I've seen this website, but I haven't checked it out. Like, this is really good.
Yeah, it's a great website. I talk about it a little bit more in my video, and I've got links to it. But for those people who are listening right now, it's called hereistheevidence.com. The other thing I want to say too is while we're
look at all this, dude.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Yeah. I spent probably 4 hours on it the other day.
Holy shit! It just keeps going. It's like Energizer Bunny.
Yeah. So anybody in Cuck Lives Matter who says that there's no evidence of voter fraud, here is the evidence right here. .com.
Yep. Got it. Fuck yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think that the other thing is that, we really have to share this stuff. And there's a lot of people out there, and what they're doing is you can't share links from BitChute, or you can't share links from this website or that website because these websites are being blacklisted. Well, guess what? There's a workaround for that too. It's called URL shorteners. You can go to TinyURL or a bunch of other URL shortener websites. If you can't post up something like that, you should be able to go in and post otherwise. So that kind of gives you some.
I wanted to pull this up and see if you had thoughts on it. So this is actually supremecourt.gov. It's the official website of the Supreme Court.
I think the new assignments are great, but I am upset that Kagan is now at the Ninth Circuit, knowing that my case is going to the Supreme Court.
Damn, yeah, it's a huge bit. So what does this mean, though? Like, what is this? I didn't know the Supreme Court even worked like this. I knew federal judges, hundreds of them, right?
Yeah, what the Supreme Court does is if there's emergency motions, they have one of the 9 justices listens to those motions and makes a determination of whether or not the Supreme Court accepts it, and also to do like emergency rulings and that sort of thing. Now, there's some other things that they do as well. I'm not going to get into that right now, but that's the super broad strokes layman's explanation. But that said,
this only exists though year round. They always have this set up, or this is new?
They have a setup, but I believe that it's done by circuit. So like the Ninth Circuit, for example, you can see is the largest circuit. It's the yellow on the left.
Yep.
So Kagan is there, and if you highlight each one, you'll notice in the battleground states it's the majority Republican, but exception like there, like so, Clarence Thomas is going to be Georgia. I think Michigan is going to be Barrett. No, it's Kavanaugh. Barrett is Pennsylvania, I believe.
Yep.
Let me take a look here. Go to the right. There you go. Oh no, that's Alito, right? So Barrett is a dark brown in the center.
Which one?
Go up center to Wisconsin.
Got it.
Yeah, that's Barrett.
Yep. Oh, she has no face.
Oh, they don't have a picture for her yet.
She's so new. That's crazy. Yeah.
Correct. So, but what's interesting is that in like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, those are all conservative justices. That should tell you something.
The hardcore ones, yeah. Even what's his name is well, you got this loser over here. I mean, this guy isn't the worst, but he's pretty bad. But he's not in states that really matter right now, right?
Well, I mean, John Roberts is the Mitt Romney of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he's definitely rhino, and he's definitely a neocon.
But all the states that really matter all have hardcore conservative judges on them right now, right?
Well, I like the fact that Kavanaugh's on the court, but he's not hardcore. He's a moderate Republican. I mean, he's definitely evangelical, but his rulings have been absolutely moderate. They've not been hardcore conservative at all.
But none of them are traitors like Roberts, right? I mean, Roberts, I wouldn't trust. He's Mitt Romney. I wouldn't trust him for shit.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that when Bush appointed him, the neocons were pretty much the driving force of the Republican Party, and so he was palatable to them. But like he's no Scalia, and most of these justices, with the exception of Barrett and Thomas and Alito, are not constitutionalists at all.
So Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are kind of moderates, you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although they had a 4-4 decision that was split for Pennsylvania, and that was before ACB joined. So we'll see how that goes.
Right. So what are your other questions?
My other questions: what are some of the other legal? I know you're favoring obviously Insurrection Act. I'm all for it too. I mean, let's fucking roll. Let's stop there. I'm not in favor of an Insurrection Act. The problem that I have is that because the clock is ticking and the time frame to challenge these cases is extremely limited. Yep. I don't think we're going to have time to do proper litigation. I just don't see it. I mean, I want to see all the evidence come out in court. I want to see these trials be televised and for the American people to watch. The American people deserve it. I just don't see it being happening because everybody said, look, you have this extremely short time, this expedited time frame to prove it. And I see the Republicans are in the same position as those falsely accused of domestic violence. In domestic violence court, somebody falsely accused has 14 days to defend themselves. Now that's 14 days to find your witnesses, do your discovery, and then you go to court. That's not enough time to do anything. That's enough time to get your gun rights taken from you falsely and to be falsely witch hunted. There's no time to do anything appropriate, and it violates due process. Well, in the voting scenario, everything has to happen in a very expedited time frame. And that's why I think with these states refusing to certify until the last minute, I think that really hurts Trump's ability to litigate these things using lawfare. So while I don't necessarily think, and I don't want the Insurrection Act, it is the right tool for the job at this stage. Sure. That I don't have a problem with that opinion. What I'm saying is there are alternative pathways. You're skeptical of their viability due to the time frame.
Yes.
But we have in 2000, there was 37 days where Al Gore tried to litigate his shit in court, eventually lost. Idiot. I don't know. I mean, maybe you're right. I just feel that I've been looking into this and there's other pathways they could take that are even maybe less likely. For example, convincing the state legislatures, which in my understanding to the federal constitution, they have absolute authority to designate the electors of each state, independent of the popular vote, like regardless. So if they believe there's election fraud, I think that's why Trump, for example, called the Michigan state legislator leaders to the White House just yesterday. And they left to kind of put out this kind of, generic statement. But I'm wondering if they're just going to do what they want, which could supposedly set it up to a contingent election or a contingent outcome, something like that.
Well, I think if they do something like that, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see insurrection on the streets even more than we're seeing it already. And what I mean by that is that the left is going to lose their shit, and they're already have admitted to resorting to violence in the past.
Yeah, I think they're going to lose their shit even sooner than that. I mean, the minute there's any, the minute every day that goes by, there's more. It looks better and better for Trump, in my opinion. There's this news conference. This comes out. They're moving. Moving along with this and that. At some point, they're just start freaking out. I don't think it's going to be December 13th or 14th or 15th. It's going to be much sooner than that. It's going to be next week and the week after that, the weeks leading up to it. So, yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
Talk to me about now. Here's a one that's gonna be a lot of fun, maybe tragically fun. It's not guaranteed. I believe Trump's going to pull this through one way or another. This guy is committed to winning. He has a history of winning. His life is on the line. I think if he gets removed from office, they're going to try to bankrupt him or kill him or silence him somehow immediately or as soon as possible. So him winning is important for the nation. It's important for himself. It's important for his family. They'll go after him in every way that they can, internationally, not just in America. But it's not guaranteed that Trump will win. There's no guarantee in life other than like dying. So if Biden gets installed in the White House, this is bad, my view, right? And yours too, I'm sure. But what can our audience expect under Biden presidency? I mean, I'm thinking economic collapse,
Well,
war, like all kinds of stuff.
I think what you're going to see is I think that you're going to see Biden is going to pardon a bunch of domestic terrorists. I know, Colin Kaepernick has already asked for pardoning of one, like a murderer already. I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see the law enforcement industry completely take a backseat. And you're going to watch local governments in tier 1 cities lose their shit. I always thought it was kind of funny when Lori Lightfoot got Chicago. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe how she won." And I started laughing. And they're like, "What's so funny?" And I said, "Look, she didn't win." And they're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Think about it. Anybody from Chicago, anybody who has been looking at Chicago for the last 40, 50, 60 years, they all know which direction the wind is blowing. The reason Lori Lightfoot won was not because she's electable. She's unelectable. I mean, look at her. She looks like she looks like a fish out of water who's drowning currently, right? Yeah. So there's no way she can win. Everybody took a big step back and they let the short bus take a step forward and they let her preside over the fall because none of them wanted to destroy their political careers by continuing. So they were like, yeah, we'll let her deal with it. And then she's going to think that she won. And now you look at her entire administration and it's been just a nightmare. I mean, there's murders every day in Chicago, and you're going to see this everywhere. You're going to watch cartels come in. You're going to watch, all these communities. Sex trafficking is going to go way up. And I'll tell you what, for the leftists listening to this, what's even more funny about this whole scenario, and I say funny in an ironic sense, is that feminism is going to get set back 100 years because all these minorities who live in these cities are going to sexually harass, sexually assault, and murder all these women. And no one's going to arrest them. No one's going to stop them. Illegal immigration or illegal immigrants are going to continue to do it. And you're going to watch a lot of these places succumb to like Sharia law. So, these women who are like empowered thoughts, and they're going to walk down the street in their miniskirt, and the Sharia police are going to roll up on them, and they're going to treat them like a king, as in Rodney King.
The Sharia police.
Yeah, I'm serious. They look, in Detroit and in Minnesota, they have Sharia police. They have Sharia police cars. They wear uniforms and they go around and they police people. And you're going to watch what's happening in Europe right now. You're going to see it in parts of the country. And you're going to see tribalism is going to rule because no one's going to want to live in these cities. These cities are going to be hellscapes. So, yeah, I don't see it happening. And honestly, there isn't a force big enough in the world to bring the entire American, the United States to heal because we have too many guns. And they're going to go, well, we need to turn in your guns. Yeah, we'll turn it in. And then there you go. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about the Great Reset. I'm sure you're familiar with this. I mean, that's what I see Biden as his main. There's so many bad things that would happen under Biden presidency quickly and slowly, right?
Yeah.
But the Great Reset thing seems to be the biggest threat because now it's not new. They've been talking about this for years. It seems to me like Alex Jones is right about almost everything. And that these motherfuckers are coming for us in every way you can think of. And that's what we've seen a lot throughout 2020. And the Great Reset, I really think that Biden, if he gets in, his plan is to basically destroy the economy into a real Great Depression and then just collapse it crash the stock market, crash the dollar, and usher in communism as quickly as possible. Just so massive chaos.
I agree with that assessment. And I think that, yeah, Alex Jones has been right about a great many things. But I think that our country's too big to introduce a reset. But we've already seen the Great Reset in certain places. We've seen it in Washington State. We've seen it all over the left coast, San Francisco. We've seen it in Baltimore. We've seen it in Chicago, parts of Kenosha. We've seen it in Washington, D.C. The Great Reset is already happening. The problem is that everybody is executing on their own page. There's no top-down organization. And the other problem is that because this is a government by fraud, like the old school communists were, everybody's going to be stealing as much as they can. No one's going to be able to trust anybody. And that's why you're going to watch these cities implode. That's why I've been telling everybody for the last year, get out of the tier 1 cities, get out of the tier 2 cities. If you live in a left-wing state, fucking leave.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm loving Florida, man. I mean, our governor has been fucking super hardcore.
Yeah.
Really, really loving it. Other ones, George, obviously, this guy is a fucking rhino piece of shit. Texas seems to be the home of rhinos. What do they have, Greg Abbott now or some bullshit? Before that, they had Rick Perry. They gave us George W. as well. But Florida is a savage, man. I mean, we've got a great governor. Rick Scott was, mediocre at best, but it wasn't evil, I think. But this guy, Ron DeSantis, has been fucking savage, man. I love it.
Well, I like this idea that you can shoot rioters. I think that should be across the country. I think if there's a rioter, because think about it. How many innocents across the country since these riots have started, how many innocents have been negatively impacted? And you notice that like the only places where these major riots happen, where there's death and destruction and massive violence, they're left-wing shitholes. That anybody who considers voting left wing should really think about that, and they should take it to heart, because a lot of these places have been ruled by. And I said this before it was said publicly. I said it 3 years ago. You live in a left wing shithole. It's been governed by left wing people now for 20, 30 years. I think it's a problem.
What do you think of Pennsylvania? George Bruno is asking.
I think that there's going to be a huge fist fight in Pennsylvania. I think the Dominion voting people, by not showing up, I think it's grounds to file antitrust against them. And I think that here's the other thing I think too. I think the state legislatures, when they ask people like Dominion or Big Tech or whatever, don't invite them. Send them a fucking subpoena so that when they violate the subpoena, you could show up with the guys in the tack gear and the guns, grab them by the hair, again, miss the back door about 4 or 5 times while you're putting them in the car. And then you drive them to the Senate so they can testify under oath. But I mean, there's so much corruption in Pennsylvania right now. And again, it's a tale of two cities in a lot of these states where, Philadelphia, for example, there's a lot of leftists there. There's a lot of, give me free shit people. But then out in the rural areas, not so much. And I think that, I don't know, and I'm going to get a little conspiracy theoritorial here, or, be a conspiracy theorist, I should say. I think that this idea that the rural United States for the last 5 or 6 years has been undergoing a meth epidemic, I think that's a top-down thing. And I don't have any real reason to say it other than I lived through the crack epidemic of the 80s. I read Gary Webb's book. I read all his reporting in real time about, the Iran-Contra affair and all these people talking about, how cocaine was artificially put into these communities. I think that's happening in a lot of rural communities, because you got to ask yourself, how do the cartels know how to avoid all these small town cops everywhere, unless, there was some sort of government-led or government-run conspiracy to do that? And I think that's a direct attack on American culture, the American family, and rural America. And I think that really, when we talk about it, I don't think necessarily we need to have a war on drugs, but I definitely think that, we need to be looking at these in harsher terms.
So and what you're saying is that they're trying to cull the rural voting population that typically avoids the government, doesn't trust it.
Well, and they're trying to make everybody dependent on the government. So if you think about it for a second, if you have nice things, but you have 10 meth heads living around you, you have to shoot them in order to, keep them away eventually. And I think that you're seeing some of that in rural Pennsylvania as well, where the strength of the red counties in rural Pennsylvania, as in many other places, they're not as strong as they were, say, 10 years ago, because we're now having this top-down meth epidemic that just happens to be affecting each and every rural community that happens to vote Republican. It just doesn't make sense to me. It just, again, it seems it's too neat.
Yeah, it's other stuff too, right? It's not just meth, but pills and shit like that, right? All these prescription pills and shit. Yeah, it's fucking shit show, man.
Yeah.
At least not in Oregon, you can do whatever you want, right? Maybe Hunter Biden will go up there and hang out for a while.
Well, and I'm hoping that they file a lawsuit in Pennsylvania, and I'm hoping that it goes federal. And I think that Pennsylvania, because of what Alito's already done in Pennsylvania already,
Yep.
I think that there's a good chance that Trump will win Pennsylvania because Alito's already said segregate these votes, and everybody's losing their shit over it.
They disobeyed the order too. He had to send them another notice because they fucking just disregarded what he said.
Right.
Which
And what they should have done, though, Trump
really
should have filed contempt on that.
Okay.
He should have filed contempt, and he should have said, look, for every day you're out of compliance with the order, it's $1,000. Have a nice day.
Nice. Talk to me about, we're getting a little bit, almost 40 hour and 40 into the show, but we'll wrap up soon. But talk to me about I know we've talked about it a little bit throughout the show and previously, but I think it's more important now than ever. Talk to me about civil war. I mean, is it really realistic that America goes on indefinitely without a second or a third civil war, depending on view or history?
Well, when a lot of people talk about civil war, they talk about it in terms of like the first civil war that the United States went through, or the type of civil war like World War II style war. I don't think that we're going to see that, and I actually think we're in a civil war now. I've actually thought for about 2 or 3 years that we have been in a civil war. And the reason I bring that up is because there's been a Cold War in the alphabet agency since Trump took office. And I know I talked a little bit about that early on, but I think that it's important to reiterate. That's why you're not seeing the Department of Justice doing a lot. That's why you're not seeing a lot happening with the FBI. It's because people are fighting each other. And they're not communicating. They're not talking. I mean, think about it. I mean, the Fast and Furious program where Obama allowed the DEA to transfer all these guns to the Mexican cartels. I mean, that's horrendous. And that right there, that's a traitorous act, and he should be tried for it and lost in Guantanamo. But that said, I think that we are in a civil war now. Again, you see it in big tech. You see people on the street getting assaulted. You see this civil unrest that's happening. And so I think that the civil war that we're seeing right now is more in the context of the decline of like Venezuela, where the quality of life gets lowered and lowered and lowered. And the tier 1 and the tier 2 cities are almost uninhabitable by people with classic American values. For example, so I was with a friend the other day, and we were grocery shopping. Now, I worked in grocery for a long time while I was working as a paralegal because the benefits were good. And I made decent money doing it. And it was interesting because I remember 15 years ago, if you're going to prepare for Thanksgiving, you always made your grocery shopping happen a week or two prior, right? Because you had family coming, you had all these people coming, you had to prepare for it. And if you waited till the last week, nobody was there. Well, this friend of mine is from a tier 1 city. And I'm shopping for my Thanksgiving stuff. And they're like, wow, there's all these people in the grocery store. This is crazy. It's like double, triple the amount. I said, yeah, well, this is what normal people do when you want to celebrate Thanksgiving. They don't wait until the last minute to do it like they do in the tier 1 cities because they have family values. They have extended family and those types of things. So that's kind of a little bit of a tangent. But as far as civil war is concerned, the problem is that you don't have that family security. You don't have that multi-generational communities that are there. And so we're going to see the civil war happen more and more. It's going to come out into the open more when people start doing more violence publicly. So like that assassination in Portland, that was civil war. Kyle Rittenhouse, that was an act of war. And the reason I bring that up in those terms is because, and I've said this for a long time, and I don't know, people are afraid of it or what, but patriotic Americans are civil rights victims because national origin discrimination is a federal crime. And the type of stuff that people reported about in the 1950s and the 1960s, where blacks tried to register to vote and they were beaten to death, or they were hung, or they were lynched, or they were assaulted and raped and killed. All those things are happening now. But instead of blacks or Latinos being targeted, it's patriotic Americans who believe in the Constitution, who believe in our Second Amendment rights. And we're seeing these people infiltrating the highest halls of government. These people are city council members. These people are in the CIA. They're in the NSA. They're in the FBI. They're in the DEA. There's even been people who have worked near the White House that have been outed as these cold warriors. And in the places where the left maintains power, they're out in the open. Children are getting, kidnapped on the streets. People are getting shot or they're getting beat up and assaulted, and everybody's just laughing at them.
I guess
And
my skepticism is that I don't know. I'm certain you would agree to some element, but I don't think it's impossible for another civil war. Not that I'm advocating, but I don't think it's impossible for another one to kick off in a classical sense. Like I agree with you that we're in kind of cold culture war, civil war for a while, and we're seeing major institutions, major corporations, coming firing down on Americans, assaulting the Constitution more or less through indirect means like
well, it's
230 and things like that.
asymmetrical, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I just don't know if that'll go on. And like people, one of the things I've seen conservatives that I just fucking hate it. They're like, oh, no matter what happens, this election, America's going to be fine. It's like, motherfucker, like how many elections going to get stolen in a general election for head of state, for commander in chief of the military before it's not okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many in a fucking row have to get stolen before it's not okay, before the country collapses? It could just be one. Like that's so when I see that shit, it pisses me off. And then, also, factually, I think it's improper to say that a civil war is impossible. It is certainly possible that one could kick off it wouldn't be north versus south like it was last time. The country's not divided that way. But you see real behavior patterns and voting
It'll
patterns
be
different.
urban versus rural.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll
I
be
think
urban,
that's
yeah.
like that, which matches the mirrors the voting, right? What we see
Yeah.
today.
It'll be urban versus rural, and what you're going to see happening is that neighbors are going to start standing together, and I mean they're not necessarily going to be intentional communities per se, but you're going to see a lot of this stuff happening. I don't think it's going to be a scenario where the militias are going to get involved, because if that's the case, we would have seen the Oath Keepers deploy. Because, for example, when the big rancher, the Bundy Ranch scenario,
Yep.
the Oath Keepers, they deployed in force there, and they were able to back down the federal government, and they ultimately were able to win without firing a shot. But I think that if the Oath Keepers had deployed to some of these Patriot Prayer groups, and they had employed in the same kind of numbers that they had deployed with the Bundy Ranch stuff, that violence wouldn't have happened. I mean, you look at the first Patriot group that showed up in Portland. They were outnumbered 3-1, and most of those guys didn't have any kind of weapons. And they beat Antifa and BLM and all of them. They beat them down, they routed them, and they chased them down the street. And I think that when people see that, they're going to really pay attention to it. But the problem that I see is that since 2017, Antifa's been training. They've received military training, they've received firearms training, they've received tactical training, and we've seen it in the riots. We've seen their training in action in the riots. They're well-funded, well-geared, well-organized. And I think that what you're going to see happen is eventually Antifa is going to push the envelope and try to control the narrative. So, like, for example, when Antifa tried to show up to that town in Idaho, and 200 militia people showed up to protect the Walmart and to protect the downtown, and Antifa drove up and they were getting ready to power up. They literally drove into the parking lot. They saw all those patriots standing there with AR-15s and shotguns and everything else, and they went, and then like, oh, fuck you, and they gave them the one finger salute, and they drove away like bitches, because they knew if they'd gotten out of their car, they were going away in a body bag. So, but eventually you're going to see Antifa push the envelope, because that's what they always do. And eventually it's going to spark off and continue to spark off. It's already sparked off. There was an assassination in Portland, Kyle Rittenhouse, they tried to murder him. How many patriots are walking down the street to get jumped from behind and beaten and assaulted? And you know what? Their lives are never going to be the same again. People don't understand that. Like, when you get beaten down like that, and you lose half the teeth in your mouth, or somebody kicks in your orbital socket, or they kick you while you're down in your back, you don't recover from those types of things. And sometimes those injuries are permanent. These people's lives will be changed forever. And the more that Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the left attack patriotic Americans, the more you're going to see patriotic Americans radicalized. Yeah. And the closer we're going to be getting to a shooting war. But I don't think it's going to be like a north-south. I think it's going to be skirmish and skirmish and skirmish. And I think it's going to be somewhat of a Cold War. And I've seen places online on the internet where people have actually infiltrated Antifa organizations, and they're reporting back on them. So it's happening now. Some of this stuff is happening now, but people are being very, very quiet about it. And I think that there are elements in the government that are pushing this false narrative in an effort to demonize patriotic Americans, to preempt civil war, or at least to preempt the optics of civil war. So let me give you an example. The governor of Michigan, Stretch and Gretchen Whitmer.
The Grinch.
Yeah, well, in high school they called her Stretch and Gretchen because she was a thought.
Nice.
So anyway, a bunch of people planned to kidnap her and they talked about it. Well, it turned out that the main pusher to do this was an FBI informant. And they're like, oh, look, they were a bunch of white supremacists and they're in the Boogaloo movement. Well, the Boogaloo movement is a government operation. It's a psyop. It's a COINTELPRO sort of thing. Nobody who's anybody in the country believes the Boogaloo movement is anything other than just this, federal false flag organization created there. And it was funny because when people started doing digging on the people who got arrested, these people were pro Black Lives Matter. They were pro Antifa. They were anti-Trump. And yeah, they were white, but that's where it stopped. That's where the similarities stopped. So you're going to see more of that now. Like even like Kyle Rittenhouse, they said he was a white supremacist and everything else. And what people don't understand is that before Kyle Rittenhouse had to defend himself, like he was giving first aid to Antifa.
Yep.
So, he wasn't there like to take sides. He was there to try to keep the peace. And I think that people don't understand that when it comes to that sort of thing. But I think we're going to see a lot more of that sort of thing pop off. But I also think that when it comes to the cities, I think that the left is going to have a really difficult time coming out into the country because there's going to be so many drug addicts and so many criminals in these cities and so few cops that they're going to have problems of their own. That's why I call these cities self-cleaning ovens.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal way to put it. Jesus. All right, last question for you before we hop off here. Hot question. You have your own view and opinions on what Trump should do. There's things that are happening in the real world that we see, things that we don't see that are happening, right, that we'll see in the coming days and weeks. But what are your thoughts on Trump's own personality and resolve to navigate this successfully, whatever path that he ends up choosing and whatever happens? Do you have any opinions on that and Trump actually being the one to spearhead this?
Well, it's interesting because Trump's not a career politician. And the majority of people we've had who have held federal office or important offices at the state and local level, they've all been career politicians. None of them have ever worked in the private sector. And what's interesting about Trump is that Trump is very blunt in his communication style. He doesn't split hairs, and he doesn't worry about whether or not he offends the teetotalers. And I think that the challenge here is that what he's done is he's given the country a backbone and said, look, you can speak your mind. And if what you say is offensive, that's okay. And I think that he's taken a lot of heat for that. But I also think the reason he's taken the heat for that is because he's like, don't tell the masses. They're like, don't tell the masses, what they're allowed to do. And it's really interesting because the Democrats have gone after Trump since he's been in office. They said, oh, be ungovernable, resist, and do all these things. And again, they're acting like they're the little guys. But let me tell you something. When you have the corporate media behind you, when you have every large Fortune 500 company in your pocket, and you have big tech in your corner, you're the empire. You're not the rebellion.
Yep.
Okay? You are the evil one. You're not the rebellion. And I saw a meme about Trump a couple of years ago, and it says something along the lines of, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just standing in the way.
Yep.
And I think that's true in a lot of ways because, while Trump's style may be less than politically correct, he's extremely articulate, and he pushes people's buttons purposefully because he wants to see what their reactions are. But he also wants to communicate with the common man. And I think that that's something that he does better than any other president in my lifetime because he doesn't talk down to anybody. He talks to you, not at you. And I think that's extremely important because if we're going to rebuild this country, we have to be able to speak plainly. We have to be able to speak honestly. We have to act ethically. And none of us is better than anybody else.
I pulled up this article exactly because of the point you just brought up, that he talks, in a way that everyone understands. And I remember once at a rally, I think that's what this article is referring to. He talked about how the Russia stuff and all, the impeachment, it's all ridiculous bullshit. Just flat out said ridiculous bullshit at a rally to 30,000 people or whatever, with all the news cameras watching. I mean, that not only it's its own phenomena to see a president say that in public, right? Ridiculous bullshit, to curse like that. But that's also how we would talk in private or on a podcast like this. But especially if me and you were having a beer or a drink or something, like, yeah, it's just fucking ridiculous.
Or at a barbecue.
At a barbecue, like, that is how Americans talk, especially the men. Women curse a little bit less, and they should curse probably not at all. But except in the bedroom. But men, we curse. It's fucking ridiculous bullshit. Fuck these communists. Fuck Antifa. This is how people talk, and that's why you're right. He's blunt, and that's why we respect him, because he talks like a fucking man. He talks blunt. He doesn't talk down to you like you're saying. You don't ever feel that.
Well, and I think
it's like someone you could hang out with to have a beer.
Right, but I think it's a double-edged sword, or not. I'm sorry, not a double-edged sword. It's a two-pronged test, right? So, for example, a lot of people talked about how Obama was articulate and Obama was a great orator, and at some level, early on he was, but so he meets the first prong of the communication, but then you got to go to the second prong, action. I always talk about trust but verify. You can always tell somebody or tell about somebody based on what they do, not just in public, but in private. And that's the thing where Trump is fundamentally different than any other federal politician in our lifetime, with the exception of like Ron Paul and maybe Rand Paul, is that he walks the walk as best he can. And it's difficult for him because he's got to navigate all these, massive special interest groups and multi-billion-dollar corporations and all the lobbyists and everything else. And he's got to manage all those things. But even through all that, even through that minefield that he navigates through, he still says what he means what he says, and he follows through, and he does his best to make sure his actions mimic his words when it comes to his campaign promises, when it comes to the things he says, about the country. And whether you like or hate Trump, that's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that the man backs up his words with actions. And the sad part about it is, ask any leftist, if you're listening to this podcast, ask any leftist, listen, what is it about Trump's policies you don't like? You see, leftists will go, well, they're racist. Okay, well, answer the question without an ad hom attack. Answer the question without a personal attack. What is it about his policies do you like? And more importantly, what is it about Biden's policies, or what is it about Democrat policies that you like?
They have no answer to these questions. And nothing.
They can't, because they don't think about them in those terms. And if anybody says, oh, we want more equality or this or that, okay, well, how are you going to pay for it? If our country is where before COVID, where most Americans had less than $500 in their savings account for a crisis, and they were, practically flat on their backs anyway, COVID happens and destroys the service industry, destroys the gig economy, and you're in this scenario where you're like, well, fuck, now you're fucked, and unemployment can't carry you. Yeah. And these people are super upset because they got a master's degree in disabled Black transgender studies, and they're like, I can't get a job. Well, no, because you're not marketable. In fact, you shouldn't even be allowed to run around on the street. They need to put you in an institution because you have Trump.
That's why they're clamoring for communism. That's why the Great Reset, if they can pull that off, I think that's what the ultimate goal is mass economic destruction.
Right, but
here's currencies, and then
that becomes
clamoring for government money.
Right, but that becomes a self-cleaning oven as well, because if you think about it, the United States gives a bunch of money to Europe. We give a bunch of money to the United Nations and everything else. And if they bring communism to the United States, then everybody else can't leech off of us anymore. So you're going to watch Europe implode. The EU is going to shut down. You're going to watch the United States have all these problems. China's not going to come here because, again, you're going to watch China implode because they rely on our economy for their economy to stand up.
I think this is the point, though. They want to collapse pretty much everything and just watch it all burn. I mean, Alex Jones has been saying for years that they want to reduce. Now, this is far-fetched, I understand, but they want to basically kill billions of people and reduce the worldwide population. What better way to do that than a fake virus followed by massive, massive economic collapse, the collapse of currencies? If the dollar collapses, the world economy is going to go fucking bananas. People are going to be food shortages. People will starve. I mean, China killed, 54 million people by starving them to death? Imagine that around the world.
And I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But what I'm saying is this. Those in power think they're immune.
True.
And they're not. Because what's going to happen is that, again, when you run a kleptocracy where all your politicians are dishonest or all your people are in power are unethical pieces of garbage, right? You're not gonna usher in communism. You're gonna usher in the Game of Thrones. Where knives are going to be out for everybody, and anybody with any kind of decency in that particular microcosm is going to get Ned Starked. They're going to get killed right out of the gate. And then everybody else is going to start stabbing each other. They're not going to be able to work together because they're all narcissists. So I mean, while some of that's going to be an issue, I'll tell you what's going to be amusing is watching Russia become the #1 superpower if this happens, because Russia's going to sit back and watch all this shit happen, and they're going to laugh at everybody, watch everybody kill each other, and then they're going to come in behind and they're going to clean up the mess, and everybody's going to be Russian.
Jesus, man, what a shit show the century is going to be. Fuck.
Yep.
Dude. Yep. Well, Bill of Rights, First Amendment, Second Amendment. Live free or die, man. That's all I'm about, dude. No communism for me. 0.
Right. Well, real quickly before we end up, if anybody wants to see the full press conference of Giuliani, it's on my BitChute channel at Miss Andrew today. And as far as the evidence of voter fraud is concerned, I just recorded one last night. It should be up later today as well. And then next couple days, my video on COVID will be out as well.
On COVID, or you mean election stuff, or both, or what?
Well, I wanted to have COVID be its own thing.
Okay.
And I'll probably end up doing a couple videos on COVID because there's a lot of information to talk about. But as far as election fraud is concerned, I think this will probably be the only video on election fraud that I actually do. But it's a longer one. It's going to be somewhere between 25 and 40 minutes when it's done.
It's coming out today, you said?
Yeah, the election fraud video is coming out today.
Okay, cool. Good shit. Everybody make sure you check it out. Follow DDJ on BitChute as well as Twitter, as well as YouTube. I know he doesn't use YouTube as much anymore, but...
And Gab and Minds.
And Gab and Minds. Yep. I'll put some links in the description. I appreciate you coming on, man. I know the guys missed you on the show. Our Mr. DDJ. Good to have you back, dude. Hope to have you on a little more. We got some new faces added to the show more frequently, like Michael Foster and a couple other guys.
Nice.
Very good friends you'll enjoy, man. They're badass, based, very, very based Christian men.
Awesome.
So with that said, it's wrapping up episode 125. Everybody, thanks for tuning in live to the show. Sorry about last weekend, missing the episode. That was my fault. Tune in next weekend. We'll have episode 126. It'll be a great one, and I'll see you then. DDJ, thanks again for coming on. Everybody else tuning in live, preach. Share the video, hit the like button. It helps the video, and leave a comment under the video as well, wherever you're watching it. It helps it gain traction, views, things like that. Peace out. Happy holidays. Happy Thanksgiving. See you soon.